Well, we're all here with our neighbors, and now we have some new neighbors. But let's go meeting them for the first time tonight. The people from Melching Inc. will be making a presentation about the development of the Savvy property. I think we have this Craig Datema, Triangle, Brandon Murphy from Melching, and Ken Callow from Melching, and maybe Andy Teachman from Triangle. But come on up. Let's hear your presentation, and then I've got questions here, and we'll deal with those later. If any of you have not filled out sheets with questions, there are some cards around there you can fill out. Please make them actual questions. We're not making statements. This is not a presidential debate. And they are our neighbors, so let's keep it simple. Thank you.
One more thing. Anytime during the presentation, if you think of a question you'd like to ask, just raise your hand and either Karen or Chris will get you an index card and a pen. If you don't have one, you can just write it down. When you have it completed, give it back to them, and then Chris Willis and Larry DeVoe will compile those cards and bring them up here after, and Bill Innings will ask the questions of the group. There you go.
Well, thank you very much, Bonnie, and thank you for all the neighbors here in the Bluffton Neighborhood Association. My name is Craig Datema. I'm an architect at Triangle Associates. I'm actually a neighbor too. I have a condominium over at Dalton's Cove Condos. And in the summer, hopefully you'll see my wife and I walking around with our 12-year-old Golden Retriever rider. This is just a little gem of a neighborhood. And we love being here. Muskegon has so much to offer in terms of natural features, the beauty and accessibility of the lake. It's truly a unique community. As Bill said, Ken Callow is also with us. Ken has 29 years of his life invested in that 123 acres that used to be called Sappy. Now we want to call it the Muskegon Maritime Business Park. And also with us is Brandon Murphy. Brandon's a project manager with Melching. Also is the son of Doug Melching, who could not be here tonight. He would if he could, but he's traveling back from, I think he was eating some, what are they called, pushkas at Pat Tuesdays today. But in any case, we do appreciate the opportunity for being here. Part of our goal here is to be totally transparent in our communications with the neighbors, with the city staff, with the planning commission, with the city commission. It's great that we've been able to follow the mayor a couple of times in these presentations, because we truly appreciate their input as well. So we are here today to kind of help explain what our current process is, not only what we're doing, but more importantly, perhaps why we're doing it. So part of my goal is to kind of provide information and facts, so that then when you ask the questions, hopefully we can respond. Probably one of the press has been covering this project, and I think they've been doing a very good job of getting the information out to the community. So I want to thank them and applaud them. But one of the key issues for people to understand is that when Mr. Melching bought this property from Sappy, there was a deed restriction that says only industrial use can be used, that this property can be used for. So, Mr. Melching, we really have restrictions that we can't turn into a park, not turn into housing. We can't turn into offices and things of that nature. We have to honor and live by the current industrial zoning. So therefore, we've been looking for uses that this unique property can provide and still fit within the industrial use zoning ordinance, as well as fit within that deed restriction. Now, in our current plan, I want to emphasize this plan is continuously evolving. As we are finding new potential users, we are working to adapt the plan to facilitate their use, but still working within the overall concept that we're going to present tonight. A couple of key issues for this site is its unique access access to the Great Lakes. We'll talk a little bit more about how this development can help the city of Muskegon maintain freighter access to Lake Michigan. But we really have 123 acres with a tremendous amount of lakeshore. And at this point in time, the potential users, 85% of it fits within the current zoning ordinance, i.e. those uses that are currently allowed. And on Tuesday, as we mentioned, we're going to be in front of the Planning Commission asking for a special land use. And what that is the ordinance identifies certain uses that would be approved subject to the Planning Commission's approval. And in this case, it's going to be for the bulk storage or aggregate storage that we're proposing on the 26 westernmost acres, or in this area here. A couple of key other types of uses that we're proposing that are all currently allowed within the zoning ordinance would include renovation of the existing power plant. There's a resource there, and even though Mr. Melching is in the demolition business, he wants to adaptively reuse as much of the existing buildings as possible. We're also talking about a potential biofuel plant that would convert raw wood pulp and wood chips into pellets that could be used in wood-burning stoves. We're talking about perhaps a marine repair facility where barges and boats can be offloaded onshore or repaired into water wells that are on the property. We're looking at adapting some of the existing manufacturing that's in this area. It's about 250,000 square feet. In other words, a big building that is built like a tank. And there's certainly, hopefully, users that want to convert that into warehousing or other manufacturing uses. We're talking to a potential petroleum storage facility where petroleum could be offloaded onto storage containers on shore and then shipped off the property. And we're also talking about with a steel scrap metal facility that would be able to utilize this facility for unloading and loading steel scrap. All of those uses, with the exception of the aggregate storage, are currently approved uses within the zoning ordinance. And now, as I said, on Thursday, we're going to be meeting with the Planning Commission to talk about our special land use request. You'll notice in blue here, these are additional undeveloped areas that we are seeking other potential users. And our intent is to develop this as a site condominium. What a site condominium does is it allows us to develop this as a comprehensive master plan, where that we can then, even though you're selling or renting out separate parcels, every user of the park has to comply with the provisions of the master plan. We'll talk a little bit more like that. Perhaps truck access is an issue and concern for the city and for the neighbors. And by developing this as a site condominium, we can actually listen to the neighbors, we can receive input from the city, and we can put some teeth behind the words that says these are going to be the approved truck routes for access in and out of the plant. Our primary goal is to develop a private roadway system, interior within the plant, that would be restricting the number of curb cuts coming on and off of Lakeshore Drive. Again, our goal is to try to reduce the amount of traffic on Lakeshore. It also provides a level of security that we think is critical and important for this type of facility. We're talking heavy industrial uses. We're talking about ships. We're talking about deep water wells. It's not the place where we want our 7-year-old boys to be going down to the fishing poles and trying to catch some of the great fish that's out in Muskegon Lake. Therefore, security access is going to be critical, and it might even be tied back to some homeland security issues that this type of shipping will require. So again, because of the deed restrictions that staff have placed on the property, as well as trying to create a safe environment, we are not able to create public access to the property. But we do want to improve the property in terms of how the public sees it. As you'll notice in this map on both the east and west end, we're proposing a 100-foot natural buffer. Currently, there are trees in that area, and it would be our goal to write into the master deed a restriction so that nothing can be done to modify or change those areas. We're also proposing on the south side of the aggregate storage area that we would be creating a 150-foot buffer along Lakeshore Drive. The key for that is pretty simple. We want to create the property and develop it so it's not creating a negative impact surrounding neighborhoods. And by maintaining those buffers, we're going to protect the environment. These are shallow areas on the east and west end that will allow for marine life to continue to grow and develop in those areas. But also driving down Lakeshore Drive, we want to actually try to improve the whole looks of the property. And we don't have specific plans yet for how these areas would be redeveloped, other than we're going to be taking down a lot of old factory areas. And what will remain will be improved so that it becomes a positive looking asset for the property. We are showing the old office building, and it's a piano factory, if my memory is right, initially. Now those are just cool buildings. They need to be renovated. We're going to try to figure out how we can find a good use for that facility and still work within that deed restriction that's having placed on the property. So a lot of positive things, but as you can see, this is still fairly preliminary at this point in time. Now, in terms of our communications with the Planning Commission, one of the points that we've made in terms of the bulk storage is that this property historically has had bulk storage. I sit up on the 8th floor of Bluffton, I can see it. You have large lime deposits that have been stored there and have been removed from the site. We've had coal that have been shipped in and recently has been shipped off the site. And obviously the wood pulp that was always used as a part of the paper processing. Therefore, even though we do need to go to the city for the special land use request, we feel that our proposal is very consistent with the historical use of the property. What we're going to do is tear down some of the old junk. A lot of it's come down already. In fact, you really can't even see what's been torn down, can you? It shows you, how much screening there is existing along Lakeshore Drive. And what they've been doing is removing the center part of the plant where the old presses used to be. And then they'll be expanding both in the east and west direction from there. Now, as I said, our goal here tonight, and I do want to again thank you for your time. We want this to be an open communication, an open dialogue with the community. And we did have the opportunity to meet with the Lakeshore Neighborhood Association, I think in January. And I do have a letter from them, if I can read. This is a letter from Eloise Hefty. And without reading the whole thing, let me read a couple of paragraphs. She said, discussing it afterwards, I'd like to assume that the general audience thought the openness and information given, i.e. charts, drawings, etc., were excellent. It seemed that the majority of the people were open-minded and receptive to your information. A few have taken the negative approach, are not aware of the positive effect your company will have on the city of Muskegon and the lakeside community as a whole. She goes on to say, we need the sappy property cleaned up and something positive built on that piece of property. Light industry approach apparently is the answer. So I certainly appreciate her summarizing the sentiments from the folks in the lakeside neighborhood. It was interesting. I said, how many people have a history with this property and have been on the property? 90% of them are their arms with it. How about here? How many people here? A large number. So we certainly recognize the historical importance of this property. Not only, defining opportunities for jobs and employment within the Muskegon market. And our goal is to try to recreate some of those. Now, one interesting aspect in our research, and again, it gets going back to some of the material storage and export and import from the site, is it's our understanding the Army Corps of Engineers has recently decided that lakeshore harbors that do not carry more than 1 million tons of material in and out will no longer receive federal funding for dredging. We've seen articles in the Holland Sentinel expressing concerns that they don't have 1 million tons. And without that, then suddenly, if dredging needs to happen to keep this port open for a number of purposes, that becomes a local expense. The community and the city government would have to figure out how to fund that. And we all know that money is tight. It's tight everywhere. We've talked to the potential user of this site, and he feels that he can probably, historically shown that he's always had at least 400,000 tons of material coming in here with a high of up to about 700,000 tons, or 40 to 70% of that million ton goal. We're right now trying to confirm this with the Army Corps of Engineers to get some written documentation to document this. But I think this is a risk for all lakeshore communities. Without a doubt, Muskegon has this beautiful resource in Muskegon Lake. It's a resource for recreational use. It's also a resource that can create employment and jobs. What we want to do is be an integral part where we are developing both those job opportunities and economic growth, but still being sensitive to the environment and doing things the right way. We don't have a total yet. We're trying to talk to the various users of what they anticipate to be that economic growth in terms of jobs and in terms of improvements to the property. But very simply, I think we're talking in the low hundreds of millions of dollars of property development. Is the tax assessor here? But obviously, those type of things directly impact everyone because it does become an improvement that does go on the tax rolls that can certainly help fund other critical programs for the city. And we're probably talking about, I don't know if we can reach the number of employees that Savvy used to have, but certainly hundreds, if not low hundreds of jobs. They had thousands, that's right, over 1,000. So we're talking about hundreds of potential jobs. We can't say for certain what those are until we lock down these potential users. And as you can imagine, this is a pretty big endeavor to take on. The interest has been phenomenal. And as I said, the key is for us to allow some flexibility in the development of the plan so we can adapt the plan to those specific users and what those needs are. Which gets back to why are we to the city with a special land use already? Well, the truth is that really becomes the primer of our pump. By securing this approval, it will allow us to do critical improvements to the lakeshore, including the enlargement of the existing water dock and the access to Muskegon Lake, as well as other improvements to that lakeshore. It allows us to fund the private roadway and some of the other improvements that we're talking about. It's a need that we see in the economy today. We can do these improvements. We can put these dollars to work immediately, helping improve the rest of the property. So we'll be talking that over with the city on Thursday. But the critical thing is, if there's denial at these first critical steps, then how do you get to the end? And it's important that people know that this has to be driven based on common sense and economic fiduciary duties. We certainly, what we are going to do, want to be a long-term investment for the community. One of the areas that we are certainly looking for, and hopefully I'll get some questions there, are some of the key areas that you have some questions in terms of how this might impact the neighborhood. We've talked a little bit about the buffers on the east and the west, as well as along Lakeshore Drive. Talked a little bit about truck traffic, and I know that's obviously a concern because this is an industrial property that is surrounded by commercial and residential uses. We've asked the city, what are your recommended truck markets? As I said, part of our thoughts of a site condominium is we can write these limitations right into the master deed and try to put some teeth behind those words so that we can enforce them with any of the users of this site. So we certainly are open to ideas from the city, but I think this is something that's more of a regional, more of a city impact, and we certainly want to work with the neighbors as well as with the city. So I think with that, that kind of concludes some of my overview, and I'm certainly more than willing to take any questions. If it gets too technical, I'm going to have to rely on Ken here, because it's 29 years of history on the site.
Well, we've got some.
Excellent.
As we start going through these, let me know if you think they're getting redundant, because a lot of them ask the same thing. I was going through some of these cards, and the term that keeps coming up on a lot of these is the term aggregate. So explain to us what that is and why it's there.
Well, aggregate is actually a term that's in the zoning ordinance, and it can relate to a number of different types of products, from crushed stone to sand to boulders. Help me out here, Ken. I'm trying to think of other uses. Potentially road salt, I've heard, would be an aggregate. The lime and the coal that has been imported and exported from the site would be considered an aggregate. It's, basically stuff that you can put on a large ship, take off the ship, store, and repackage it and send it out over land or also by boat.
Thank you. And in line with that, the question is, how will you stop seeing dirt from blowing off the aggregate piles onto Lakeshore Drive and the bike path?
Good question. We will take that up with the potential user of that site. I'm not an expert, but I've seen in areas like the coal piles that have sprinkling systems that will dust it down. I've seen plastic covers. I'm an architect, I'm not a civil engineer, but I think that's a great question that would need to be answered, and we'll work on that.
I think another part of that answer is buffers we're planning to leave in place would help control that problem into the wind, affecting the pile as well as what will go off the pile.
I don't know if you can answer this, but what would it take to lift the deed restriction?
Just from my history, I wasn't personally involved at the time. There were a lot of people that had an interest in this site. And Sappi could have made a lot more money, from what I've heard, than what they got. But this was an absolute criteria that they would not budge from. Is that true, Kim?
That's correct.
So, I can't say what their thinking would be, but it would require their action, not Mr. Melching's action.
This goes along with that, and this is one question you might not be able to answer, it's really a question for an attorney, I think, but how can a deed restriction placed on property by a company in South Africa be binding on the city of Muskegon?
Well, they were a property owner in Muskegon. Obviously, we all have rights as property owners, and this was within their legal rights.
This question also has come up on several of the cards. Can zoning be changed? And if so, would you change the plans?
Well, I'm not sure when you say can the zoning be changed, what you're referring to, if you're talking about the uses. Or another approach that the city, I think, has asked us to consider, we'll be talking to them on Thursday about, is whether or not we'd be willing to change our request from a special land use to a planned unit development. And the city ordinance does have several different types of planned unit developments. Our initial thought was that since 80% of the site complies with this existing zoning ordinance, it would simplify the process, one, but probably more importantly, a planned unit development, every time there's a change to the plan, you have to go back through the city process, the planning commission, the city commission, and get approval for that change. So our initial thought is that it would add administrative burdens to both the owner as well as to the city. The advantage of a PUD is that the city staff and the planning commission and city commission can have more direct input, and what they approve becomes what thou shalt build. So we are open to have those discussions with the city. As I said before, our process is transparent. We're looking for ideas, we're looking for suggestions. In fact, there was a city staff member that suggested that we use the term business in our name instead of industrial, which we appreciate, because we really want to create business.
This question, what is going to happen to the potential toxins that seep into the lake? I think we're getting into pollution concerns here.
Great question. We have similar concerns. I've heard all sorts of rumors about this being a toxic site, and the evidence I've seen is that's not true. It's been clearly identified where there are certain materials that would have some undesirable elements in it. Our construction process would be first to avoid those areas, and secondly, when that work needs to be done, to do it under the approved methodology. Those materials will not leave the site. Part of our plan would be to put a comprehensive stormwater management plan on the entire site that allows for the collection and settlement of any water runoff before it enters into Muskegon Lake. Typically, this type of development creates better opportunities for our environmental engineers with input from the city to restrict those environmental problems. Right now, there's a vacant site that really has no controls other than what was left by the previous owner. And what temporary measures Mr. Melching is doing as a part of his demolition process. So historically, by making improvements, I think we can improve and reduce the risk of those environmental concerns.
This question, will rail access still exist in the future?
Yes, the goal is to leave those rail right-of-ways on the site. Again, that will be up to the users of those properties as to how and when those rail services would be used. But I think it's one of the unique features of the site that has both water as well as rail access.
This question is about the development of the property being a good fit for the community, with concerns about noise and pollution. What are you doing to partner with us on this? What more can we do?
Well, again, what we're doing is getting input. As I discussed before, the site condominium documents, they're called the master deeds, allows us to put certain restrictions in there. But it's an industrial property, and we're going to look for good industrial neighbors.
Is the power plant going to stay in place? If so, what will it be powered by?
This is now you're getting into my lack of technical expertise. Currently, it's powered by coal and
Currently powered by coal as the main fuel, natural gas is the backup fuel, and in fact, it burns some biomass as it was produced from the woodyard operation. The potential new owners for that are looking at a full biofuel supply for that. So if you don't coal, you still have natural gas for startup fuel and upset conditioned fuel. But the main fuel would be biomass chips. So like the wood chips that used to come into the mill as part of the woodyard operation, similar type materials are coming in as fuel for the boilers. But we don't petroleum products in terms of coal like we have in the past.
What contaminants were found that made the sappy bleach plant demolition be postponed?
and you know that answer?
Yeah, we can't hear you.
You want to come up here, but these are to be heard.
And what I want to make sure is I don't give you the wrong answer to this information.
So what we found in our continuing testing to make sure we were prepared with everything ready to go for that demolition was there was a very low level, but above the minimum threshold of contamination involved with the paint matrix on the outside of that stack. I can't be real specific about what that is because of some things in the language with this out of contract. We're supposed to keep this information confidential, but know that there was this low level of contamination needs to be dealt with. And we're currently working on alternatives and plans so that when we do bring that back down, it will be in a safe manner that's approved by the DEQ. We're working with them on this project as well.
I can't understand what you're saying, man. You talk too fast, it's just a mumble. Can't hear it. I don't understand what you're saying. It's the mic maybe? I don't know. We can't understand what you're saying.
We'll try to slow down. Sorry about that. That was a point of question. Are you planning to turn the former septic site into a disposal facility for toxic waste?
No.
Thank you for that answer. This question has come up a couple times. One, it's like written out as an essay. That's not going to happen. We're not going to do that here. But it refers to some articles in the Muskegon Chronicle about the situation here. People thought they found discrepancies in. So let me try to take this question. There were two articles in NY.com stating discrepancies. Could you talk a bit about why one article states, we should bring the writer up, that SAPI instructs environmental testing and sharing of the information with the city and community of Muskegon, while another states that Melching Inc. has been and currently is testing the site. The rest, I'm sorry, I cannot read it.
Dave?
I think the question is, you've done, in the article it states that you've done a lot of environmental testing, and yet in the SAPI deed restrictions it says there will be no environmental testing by any third party or yourself or anyone who's going to be getting the property or using the property. So how are you doing the environmental testing when it's against the deed restriction?
Without approval of the company. Sam.
So the question is about the environmental testing. In one place it says the deed restricts that it cannot do any, and yet there's references to doing some. And what you don't know, you haven't read the whole deed and the whole purchase agreement, but in there it says we're limited from doing any testing except as required by law. And there have been some situations we've come across already where we are required by law to do testing, and we will certainly comply with the law where that is the case. So that's where the misunderstanding maybe comes between what the deed says, part of what the deed says, and not the whole story in terms of what is required by law. Again, we continue to work with the DEQ on projects if we need to make sure that we are in compliance with all the required laws.
And yet when we called the DEQ, they said that you have not been working with them, and neither has SAPI for the last 10 years. Not one report or response to them.
I can't answer for the DEQ's response to the question.
And why were these plans taking place before you guys went?
These questions was coming right, please. Now let's go to this. How was a sale of land completed without any required environmental study or impact statement being done, especially on a piece of lakefront land that has been industrial for more than 100 years?
Again, I'm not a labor attorney or a land law attorney. It was transacted in an appropriate manner.
This question is, what scientific data do you have that the property can't be cleaned up? That's the question.
I don't know where the comment comes from, but it came from that, so we're not responding to that.
This question, I'm not sure they can answer. This requires somebody from the city. Why didn't the city want to separate property? I'm afraid that it's only something really they can answer.
I could answer that.
This one is not a question, it is a statement. This one we've also. Again, this is a statement. We are taking questions. This question is, what about the view states? It refers to a buffer zone, no city assist. The problem that they're asking about are problems with maintaining the view.
Well, again, we're trying to be sensitive of the views from Lakeshore Drive and from the surrounding neighborhoods. Obviously, this plan will open up and keep it open along the northern boundary of Muskegon Lake. But we want to make sure that we're keeping those buffers. Ken brought up a good point if you didn't hear him. There's a question about sand and things blowing from any of the outside storage areas that's being proposed, and that tree buffer will cut down some of the winds, as I said. Will it also address how we can add other means, such as, I think it's a DEQ would require those type of provisions as well for that type of storage.
Thanks. One thing here right now, we have a lot more cars here, but we are running out of time. We're getting down to last call, I guess. This question is, why not put the windmill manufacturer that wants to try to get up Fisherman's Landing on the Saturday side? Why not put a windmill there?
I think they looked moved on.
This is another classic next question. Answered. This is another question about cleanup, but it's what the city can do. Somebody from the city really needs to answer that.
Someone from the city really needs to be here.
We were told they would be.
Was the mayor not here? I think some of us in the audience have some of the answers to these questions.
Why, the previous question about buying the property, being new on the commission for a very, very short fund, that's my fund. But we're here to work with developers coming into the city and do the best that we can and trying to set the best plans for the entire city.
With the scrap storage, how would materials be transported to the facilities?
I don't think we have a specific answer from that. We're just in the initial discussions with them. But they would have both access by boat as well as truck. I don't know if rail would also be a consideration.
This question asks you to define biomass and what would be allowed to be burnt. Biomass.
So biomass refers to basically a wood product. Typically it might be in a chip form, but not necessarily, but it's typically a wood-based product from trees.
I think the advantage there is it's a replenishable resource.
I don't know whether you two can answer this or not, but would it be feasible to sue, to overturn the deed restrictions, or to sue SAC to hold them responsible?
I'm not an attorney.
Well, that should be the rest of an attorney sometime. This question is, what documents are required before installing explosives?
Is that in relationship to the proposed blowing the stack?
I believe so.
I wasn't real close to that process. I don't know all the answers to that. In fact, I know we need the approval permit from the city. There's a state license, and there's, as we work now with the DEQ, we need their approval for our plans. I don't know what others are required beyond that.
So verify, where do we look for the documents that it's been approved?
You're ready to hear that?
I believe final approval would come from the city in terms of the explosives permit.
Is it just a verbal okay, or is there documents? That's what I'm asking.
You would have to talk with the city officials on that.
You don't know?
I do not.
Very interesting.
This question isn't, this might be again a question for the attorney, but how would a change of zoning to conservation affect plans for the property?
I'm not sure what the reference is to conservation. Are you, somebody questioning conservation easement be created, or?
I can clarify that. There's a zoning stipulation that is conservation. Zoning is the city is zoning, rezone this property.
Well, again, the
All
deed
would
restriction,
affect plans.
the deed restriction is for industrial use.
Right
So,
now, it could be rezoned.
so that it would,
And how would it affect the plans?
well, obviously, if the city zoned the land to something that the deed restriction wouldn't allow, the land would sit there and nothing would happen.
This question refers to a previous meeting, I suppose, that we'll make a presentation at. But at the lakeside meeting, you said there might be an asphalt melting facility. Is that still a possibility?
My better clarification, I think, is petroleum storage. But again, these are all preliminary users. Nothing has been agreed to at this point in time.
This leads nicely into the next question.
Let me just clarify that. the zoning ordinance does require there to be non-hazardous material storage, so that anything that we are currently proposing and talking to potential users would have to have a non-hazardous product as defined by the fire marshal.
Okay. And then in line with that, with the potential of petroleum storage, what permitting would be required, federal, state, and local?
That would be the requirement of that user. I mean, we would not be in the that business. We would either sell or lease the land to that user, and they would have to comply with all the federal, city, and state requirements.
This may be redundant, but could you point out the location or locations that have the pollution and can't be developed?
They've been surveyed, but they're not currently shown on this plan. But,
I don't think we're going to be sharing that specific information for our contract for the sale purchase.
I think that's the biggest problem you got.
Yeah. Amen.
well, transparency is, again, to communicate what restrictions Mr. Melching has on the development of this property. But if there's an agreement in place that says these are information that can't be revealed, we're being upfront and honest about it.
What country are we in? Where does it say can't be revealed? This fascist state?
If you wish to speak, please make them questions and submit them in writing. I'm not going to say it again.
Well, the community would like to voice itself rather than going through you.
There are plenty of times to do that. We are running short on time, and we were told we had to submit questions.
We were told we would get answers.
Isn't this a canned speech?
How are we doing on time, by the way? Bonnie?
Well, again, let me help clarify here. You're asking some good questions about how these potential users can utilize the property. Clarify, and our transparent goal is to explain to you where the interest is in the current property. But each one of those individuals would either be purchasing a unit in a site condominium or leasing a land lease on that. It's really going to be that potential biomass provider or the power plant people that would be running that. They would have to work with the city officials. They'd have to work through all the state and federal requirements to make sure that their plans are in compliance with all the requirements that are out there. Of course, I don't know all those requirements. I really don't need to know. It's just that there are a number of agencies in place that share your interests and your concerns. And each one of these potential users will have to live and comply with those requirements in terms of how they can develop those parcels.
I think a lot of you will be interested in this. Where can we find documents that show the bond coverage, the insurance, the list of contaminants, and the facility status report?
I don't think that material is publicly available.
Why not?
I think Mr. Calloway is explaining that there are certain restrictions in terms of what the new owner can share from the previous owners.
Yeah, man. What are they so special?
Can we be arrested for speaking?
There's another question
What's
here
the
from the
deal?
city. Once again, I think it's a question.
Ready to go?
We probably couldn't come up at a city commission meeting.
That's all this is for, okay? I'm not trying to be a jerk about this, but the questions have to come on comments. I'm not, I just feel.
I'm not the only person doing this.
Would metal scrap be processed on site?
I don't know that answer at this time.
Does the plant sit in a floodplain? If so, which zone is it in?
We don't believe it is.
If the power plant restarts, what will be done to eliminate the oily discharge that stained boats and homes in the neighborhood for so many years?
I think, Ken, and again, I'm just trying to reiterate what he said, by changing the source of fuel, primarily to natural gas, that would reduce that.
A lot of that, actually, I'm not sure, but I think a lot of that came from the recovery boiler, which was part of the pumping process, and that won't start up, and will not ever be started up again. I think that's where most of the oil film came when there was an upset in the control system on that operation and all that operated.
Well, who will be employed and for how long, and when will we know?
We're trying to compile some of the preliminary numbers for that, as I said, but again, that'll be up to each individual users. We're just trying to get our arms around that ourselves so that we can utilize it as a way to communicate to the community.
Once again, we answer this thing we can, but where can we find the existing emergency response plan and the spill control plan?
I wouldn't know.
Where will timber for biofuels plant, or biomass plant come from?
What?
Where will timber for the plant come from?
I don't know.
I know the potential buyers and operators of that have asked us about where the neighborhood got their timber from, because it's the same type of material you're looking for. And a lot of that came from north of here, basically from here up to Gaylord, was kind of the wood basket that the paper mill was supplied from. And I suspect the biomass boiler will look in that same region of the state for their supplies.
Another question about the aggregate. Are you storing the aggregate, or will you be crushing the concrete? The concern is with noise and dust control.
Again, I don't have that answer. That's up to the tenant for that parcel.
This begins with a statement, but it ends with a question. The other four large aggregate docks on Muskegon Lake are well below capacity. The owners of these docks state that another site will reduce their business. Is there a demand?
There's obviously a user out there that thinks there is a demand. Is that written by the person who wants that back?
Question, by the way, are anonymous. This is not a question. Again, what is the estimated timeline for the companies being identified and the property being used?
With approval of the bulk storage facility, that timeline can start construction late spring, early summer, depending on receiving permits from the DEQ. The other parts and pieces is going to be dependent on those users and when they would come to an agreement. I think it's realistic to say it's going to be at least a 10-year timeline for the development of this property. And there'll be, continuous changes during that 10-year period.
How much did Melching pay for this property?
He hasn't told me.
Dave, you shared that information in the paper?
2.3.
I'm sorry, Dave, how much was that?
2.3.
Okay. Those are all the questions we have. There were some other cards, but they were stating the same thing as the things we've already talked about. Yes?
I'm Byron Curtis from the City Commission.
Sure.
And, the question's been asked, why did the city stop Melching from selling it with those restrictions? And that'd be the same thing, saying to one of you can't sell your home that's zoned at R1 for another use, but the city can't stop that. It has to go as R1. The other thing that you may want to be interested in, I think if you're meeting on Thursday with the Planning Commission, the zoning of the property, which I believe is I1 and I2, spells out specifically what they can do with that property with those restrictions. And that's public knowledge. It'll be at the meeting on Thursday. It may answer some of your questions, but the city can't step in and stop this and stop that. There's ordinances that are in place, and it takes more than just say, you can't do that. It's a complicated process, but you may be interested in looking up the I-1 and I-2 zoning.
And to clarify, thank you, Mr. Commissioner. The property is all zoned I-2, but within the I-2 zone, anything that's approved use within the I-1 zone would also be allowed.
That's all we have as far as questions.
I had a question you didn't ask me, man. I asked you, how long does it take to install the explosive to make that down? Is it an afternoon or a day, or is it a week or a month? How long?
So in that process, once all the approvals are placed and the site is prepared and ready, until that point, the explosives would not be in the state of Michigan, probably. They have, I believe they have a resource they buy them from, and they deliver, I'll call it just in time. So probably the afternoon before, they would be delivered and planted in the proper places, and then that area would be secured until the explosion actually occurred.
We've got time for one more bit. Can you come up and speak up? The problem is they just won't be able to hear you.
I just wanted to ask, because I don't think we really talked about it, because we are a shoreline community with a huge tourism industry. Many of us spend all day, all summer on the water. It doesn't show any buffer zone on the water. I know you have the two large shipping areas, but as far as the rest of the manufacturing and industrial area, will there be anything done to clean that out, to make it look essentially nicer from the water? Because that is a huge chunk of shoreline. Thank you.
A good question. As you see from the graphic, we're anticipating to develop part of that shoreline so that large ships can tie up on the north side of the property. Again, this right now, we've not identified potential users.
I think we need to call it to an end right now. Thanks again for being here. This is, in the years we've been doing some of these Q&As for different reasons, this is by far the biggest response we've ever had. Obviously, this is a very important issue to everybody. Thanks again for being here.
And if I could just